In a spirit of reconciliation, the Greek community of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and the connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Good evening, Kalisperasas. I hope you're all having an enjoyable winter. Welcome to our 16th seminar in this year's Public History and Cultural Seminar Series. We're just past the halfway mark. Our next three seminars will be online with international speakers. Next week's online seminar will be by Naz Vadar, Carnival Celebrations in Late Ottoman Istanbul, Intersections of Class, Gender and Identity in AlbGrk and Baklahorani. But let's turn our attention to tonight's seminar, Language and Ethnic Identity, Constructing the Albanian Diaspora in Greece by Rexhina Ndoci. There's always been an Albanian-derived ethnic element in the modern Greek state since its inception, but it was an element that was mainly absorbed, integrated, and assimilated, almost to an extent where it's indistinguishable. The presentation today concerns Albanian migration to Greece in more recent years. It deserves close attention because it forms the most important intra-Balkan population movement post-1990, while it deviates in some crucial respects from more common patterns of settlement and adaptation of immigrants in new homelands. The fall of the Soviet Union and its allied states during the Gorbachev era also had repercussions in Albania, which also commenced its transition. The transition in the 1990s to a multi-party state and market economy was messy and fraught with problems, challenges, and dislocations. For about a third of Albania's working-age population, exodus, migration was a solution, with many arriving in Greece, and at one stage, their numbers surpassed over 500,000 individuals. And despite social and political problems experienced by the early wave of immigration in the 1990s, and despite the intense racist and xenophobic discourse adopted by many Greeks, Albanians have integrated better in Greece than have many other groups. The speaker today will examine this topic from a social linguistic perspective. In her study, 98 memes from Greek websites and social media platforms were collected targeting Albanian migrants' speech. The analysis shows that the majority of memes present Albanians as possessing many negative traits, reiterating the stereotypes about them and reinforcing them. At the same time, and by implied comparison, Greeks are construed as the diametric opposite of Albanians with more favorable dispositions. A few words about our presenter tonight, Rexhina Ndoci. She's a PhD candidate in the Department of Linguistics at Ohio State University. Prior to joining Ohio State, she completed her BA in English and Greek languages and literatures at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Her research is situated in the field of social linguistics and language contact. Her dissertation, which she's working on at the moment, is highly related to this talk today, and it focuses on the linguistic construction of Albanianness in Greece and the social perception of Albanian accented Greek. Rexhina, welcome to the program. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nick. Good evening to everyone joining us in the stream today, or good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're situated. I would like to start thanking actually Nick for his very kind invitation and for organizing this event, and Costa for the technical support, but also the Greek community of Melbourne for having me in their Greek culture and history lecture series. It actually, I have to say, it makes me very happy, and it's very encouraging that lectures like mine, with a topic like mine, are welcomed by the Greek community of Melbourne, and that the Greek community of Melbourne is actually interested, right, in some other diasporic identities back in Greece. So my talk, as Nick mentioned, is about the linguistic construction, right, of this Albanian diaspora in Greece, and particularly I'm looking how this ethnic identity is constructed through language. So I'm going to start with a short disclaimer, actually, that when I talk about Albanian diaspora, I'm not referring to Arvanites, right? So I'm not talking about this Albanian-speaking populations that moved to present-day Greece in the Middle Ages. It's sort of very well known within Greece that this is an assimilated group, right? They identify as Greeks, and they're also considered by Greeks as Greek. And Arvanites and also their language Arvanitica, right, are seen as distinct from Albani, current or more recent Albanian migrants, and their language Albanica. So when I say Albanian diaspora in Greece, I really mean those, as Nick just mentioned, those Albanians that after the fall of communism in Albania in the early 1990s moved in masses, right, migrated in masses to neighboring countries such as Greece and Italy. And I have to say also sort of my positionality here that I am also part of this migration, part of the so-called 1.5 generation of Albanian migrants being born in Albania and raised in Greece. So as you can see in this graph from the Hellenic Statistical Authority, Albanians constitute more than half of the population of the country, of Greece, right, with foreign citizenship, completely really unnumbering everybody else. This percentage translates to something like 500,000 individuals, or 5% of the population of Greece. In terms of the receptions, Albanians were met with intense xenophobic discourse. From early on, they were stigmatized as cunning, primitive, untrustworthy, dangerous, and criminals, but also as polluters and intruders of some supposed pure and homogeneous Greek identity. And a lot of this has to do with a history of bad relations between the two countries, right? Very notably, disputes over territories in South Albania, right? Also called by Greeks northern neighbors. So now, more than 30 years after this first arrival of Albanians in Greece, right, the widely circulated discourse in Greece is that Albanians are very well integrated, and that all this negative stigmatization I talked about just a minute ago, right, belongs to the past. However, what I'm going to show here in this talk today is actually this is still well present, right? But it's not overtly xenophobic, right? So it makes it harder to detect, and therefore sort of easier to say this doesn't exist anymore. But of course, right, it comes with all this sort of social, economic, psychological baggage, right, for these Albanian migrants. So this is the outline of my talk. I already talked about Albanians in Greece. I'm going to talk about a study that I did on internet memes about how Albanians are constructed there. Another study, actually all these are going to be briefly talked about. Another study looking at the perceptions of Albanian accented Greek, and then some more recent work that is still ongoing on Albanian names and ethnic labels about Albanians used in Greece. And then I'm going to offer some concluding remarks. So in my first study, I looked at collected and analyzed memes that target Albanians, and particularly memes in Greek that target how Albanians speak, right? So the Greek of these Albanian migrants. Internet memes are interesting on their own because really whatever they're communicating, whatever ideas or emotions are communicating, are pretty much assumed to be known or to be shared by their audience, right? By their targeted audience. So in a sense, they create some kind of core common ground between the creator of the memes and their and the audience and the recipients, or even if it's not right already common ground, it already emerges as common ground, something that they should know about, right? Some knowledge that they should share. Also, the sort of the nature of internet itself, right, but where they're transmitted, really allows for a lot of anonymity for their creators, which really help minimize any consequences for them in terms of including, right, hurtful content. Right, so in minimizing consequences also means, right, easier inclusion of hurtful content. So the research questions I tried to answer with these memes are, first of all, how is the speech of Albanian migrants constructed in the internet memes? And I mean, right, their Albanian Greek, their version of Greek, and how then itself Albanian is constructed through their Albanian Greek. So for the purposes of the study, I did collect and analyze 98 internet memes between 2020 and 2021, as targeting, right, specifically memes that targeted the way that Albanians speak modern Greek. These were collected through various websites, social media platforms. I used Albania, Albanos, Albania, right, Albania and Albanian as my search keywords, making sure that, right, in my inclusion, in my collection, I only included memes that has specifically, right, those keywords, either in the meme itself, in the text, or in a caption, or in accompanying comment, or in a tag, in a hashtag. So in terms of how this Albanian Greek looks like, right, what the variety of these Albanian migrants looks like, the basic idea is that it's framed like as their second language, right? They're experiencing a lot of imposition features from their first language, that is Albanian. There are certain fricatives such as h, for example, that exist in Greek, right, their second language, that are absent in Albanian. And what they do, right, they sort of adapt these phonologically, right, to what they have closest sound to h, for example, right? So a sound like h in Greek gets adapted to something like k, or a sound like g gets adapted to something like g. So this is all nice and sort of predictable in terms of what speakers typically do, right, or L2 speakers typically do. But then we find some other things that are a bit more surprising, right? So we have things such as adaptation of fricatives of sounds that actually exist in both languages, and really there is no motivation. There's no clear motivation for why would Albanian speakers who already have sounds such as the, th, and vo, adapt them to do, to, and bo, since they already have, right, these sounds in their repertoires. And also, we really see a lot of variation, which again, it's really unmotivated in terms of what gets adapted to what, right? So we have h, for example, getting adapted to Albanian Greek as a k, sometimes as a ch. This orthographic cue I'm going to explain soon sound is from Albanian and stands for a ch sound, a y sound, or a sh sound. Which these two sort of findings suggest to me that what we are finding here in these memes, really, of course, is not some accurate representation of Albanian Greek, but some kind of mock representation of Albanian Greek, as I'm going to argue in a second. So this graph here, I have collected all of these phonological features that I showed you, and the graph shows the times that they appear in the memes, right, and how many of these memes these appear. Other phonological features include non-standard word stress placement, so saying xaderfo instead of xaderfo, or using non-standard vowels, so something like teropita rather than tiropita. We also find a couple of grammatical features for Albanian Greek, or we're able to discern a couple of grammatical features for Albanian Greek. So non-standard grammatical gender marking, so things such as tihorio instead of tohorio, so feminine instead of neuter. Non-standard Greek inflectional marking, so something like egoferi instead of egofero, and so on and so forth. In my analysis, I also find a list of lexical features that seem to come up again and again in the memes, right? So I have here the list and the number these occur in the memes. Oftentimes these words carry some of these phonological features I talked about, but sometimes they don't, right? So I find both, for example, xaderfo and also xaderfo. And these words are really typically associated just with the stereotypes about Albanians, right? So this is the most common word is the Albanian sort of F word, right? So an image of the Albanians as sort of not having manners, right? Or sort of being uncultured, right? Sort of throwing slurs left and right. The second most common word is the word for cousin, right? So the idea that Albanians actually will bring their, in engaging in physical altercation, they're going to bring their extended family, right? They're not going to, they're too cowards to do it by themselves. Korio, right? Associations with ruralness. Kortari could be said also associated with ruralness, but also stereotypical professions, right? Engaged, Albanians stereotypically engaged, let's say, employed as gardeners, or even, right, trafficking weed, right? Trafficking marijuana. And my point here is that the frequency with which these words are found, right, in these memes, really suggests that these actually have some kind of emblematic character, right, for Albanian Greek. They're sort of associated with Albanian Greek and Albanians in Greece. In terms of looking at the themes, right, that emerge in terms of how Albanians are constructed themselves in these memes, in this graph here, I have sort of, again, the most common representations in how many of these memes these occur. And as you can see at the top here, the most common one by far is that they just aren't able to produce, right, proper Greek, right? They're going to make some kind of language error. The second most common one is that they're civilized, right? Some kind of lack of maybe manners or lack of knowledge of social conventions. The third is being criminals, aggressive, sort of violent types of individuals, working class, rural, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, right, the majority of them really reiterate and, as a consequence, reinforce and perpetuate the stereotypes about Albanian migrants. There is a small number, however, that do talk or address the experience of being Albanian, such as talking about Albanian food or Albanian family, right, or the experience about being an Albanian in Greece, right? So being an illegal immigrant or having to deal with assimilatory forces. So to give you an example of what these memes look like, so this first meme reads as "Tikitas se makierosho," right? What are you looking at? I'll stab you. So we get so first of all, right, just by looking at this meme, right, we get the idea that the Albanian is of course masculine, right? Is a man associated with masculinity, and it's sort of a thug type of person, right? Who's going to actually, if you dare look at him in the wrong kind of way, right, they're not going to hesitate to stab you. In terms of what is happening linguistically, we have this here, this interrogative tag here, instead of which is what is basically we have in Albanian, rather than what we have in Greek, which is typically an e. And at the bottom here, I've circled this orthographic kappa here, which suggests that we're supposed to read this word as makierosho rather than makierosho, right? So we have a substitution of this h Greek sound for a k. This other meme reads as «Αλβανός βγαίνει με την κοπέλα του για καφέ, εμένα δεν θα με κεράσεις. Που πιες μόη από το δικό μου, δεν σιτσένομαι». Right, so again, we have the construction of the Albanian as a man, right? And a man too stingy or maybe too poor to afford, right, to pay for a coffee, for his girlfriend's coffee. So what's happening linguistically? First of all, we have this switch, right, from the Greek script to the Albanian script, right, which is a variant of the Latin script, marking, right, very explicitly the difference, right, between Albanian and Greek. Then we have a couple of Albanian lexical items, moi, something like Greek mori, and po, like an Albanian particle. And then in the bottom here, I've circled this Q, which in Albanian stands for something like a ch sound, which suggests, right, where they're supposed to read this word as sichenome rather than sichenome. Right, again, in this case, now the h sound is not substituted with a k as in the previous meme, but with a ch sound. So what we find, sort of, I've illustrated here in this little graph or table, right? We have at times the substitution of Greek hu in Albanian Greek with a k or with a ch sound. We actually find the exact same pattern with the g Greek sound, right? So sometimes it's substituted in Albanian Greek with a g or a j sound. So actually this variation here, I'm going to return to the slide. This variation here suggests, right, that or then an unexplained, I guess, variation, I should say, suggests that again that we're not dealing with authentic Albanian Greek, right, but rather some kind of approximation, right, or whatever the creators of these memes think Albanian Greek sounds like. This other meme is sort of my favorite because it contains just a ton of information, a ton of these features. There's a lot happening here. I'm gonna start from reading from the top. Chief Sharop Aroma, right? If you're sent, if your family sent. In the middle, we have here Feri Xaderfo, right? I'll bring my cousin. And in the bottom, stolen apple, right? Again, the Albanian is constructed as a man, right? Somebody who curses a lot, right? Is sort of like making threats towards the family. Steal apples, right? They just like so love to steal, they're gonna steal apples. Right, even cheap things such as apples. And then, of course, again, the Feri Xadelfo, right? I bring my cousin, right, in order to beat you up, right, to engage in a physical altercation. So what's happening here linguistically, right? First of all, we have this pun here with the name of the dish soap and the Greek word feri, right, to bring, being homophonous or almost homophonous. And what I've circled here also in the bottom, it's this nitaf cluster, right? For the word xaderfo, right? Which suggests we're supposed to read this as xaderfo rather than xaderfo, which is the standard modern Greek pronunciation. And we have a substitution basically here of the sound with the d sound in Albanian Greek, even though, as I was saying earlier, the is actually a sound to be found in Albanian as well, right? So there's really no motivation for why would these Albanian speakers would substitute it. Another thing to be noted in xaderfo, right, is this placement of the stress as marked by this little dot over the S sound here. So we have, right, xaderfo, right, so the lowering of the stress from the antepenultimate to penultimate syllable. Xaderfo becomes xaderfo. However, if we look at the top here, we have another Greek word, aroma, with antepenultimate stress that actually does not lower to aroma, right? So we have really inconsistencies even within the same meme, which again suggests that we're not dealing with authentic Albanian Greek. So what we can conclude from this study so far is that really memes can be very useful sources of data. They can really be informative about what are the sort of linguistic characteristics of that seem to be assigned or seem to be associated with particular migrant communities. They can give us information about the ideologies that surround these migrant communities. They can really function as the vehicle through which linguistic variables get assigned, get imbued with social meaning, and also the vehicle through which these ideologies, right, get perpetuated, right, move on to be sort of familiar to younger generations. Some of these features, as I mentioned, some of these phonological features seem to be talked about more than others. Some of these words, phrases seem to be talked about more than others, which seem to be emblematic of Albanian speech. But this, at the same time, makes them really easily identifiable, easily to be associated with a particular ethnic group, and also to be further imitated. So as I was saying earlier, we really seem to be having really not an authentic representation of Albanian Greek, but what I call a mock Albanian Greek, in the similar vein to other mock varieties that have been studied so far. So we've seen mock Spanish, mock Asian, mock Ebonics, and more currently mock white girl. And this is sort of motivated from four findings. First of all, we don't really have motivation for why certain sounds that are shared between the two languages get adapted into Albanian Greek. We have really variation in what gets adapted to what. We have inconsistencies in if something gets adapted or not, and also even within the same meme. And what else I have, even though I didn't present this finding, but it's interesting to just refer even in passing, that we have inconsistencies even to what foreigners these features refer to, right, are associated with. So I've actually found the same meme, the exact same meme refer to or be associated with Albanian migrants in one instance, and in another instance to be associated with more recent Muslim migrants. So in general, really, these memes reiterate the usual stereotypes about Albanians under the guise and license of humor. And of course, these end up being reinforced and perpetuated. At the same time, the memes create some kind of indirect comparison between Greeks and Albanians, right? And Greeks sort of framed as the opposites of what Albanians are, or at least at least we get a glimpse of what Greeks are not like, right? So the Greeks are not like Albanians. They're not criminal. They're not uncivilized. They're not rural, low intelligence, and so on and so forth. And this becomes more explicitly evident, right, in differences in script and in non-standard orthography. So for my second study, I conducted an experiment, a so-called speech perception experiment. And I was really asking, now what happens when people actually hear people produce these Albanian Greek phonological features, right? Or when they hear them, right? When they hear these features produced in these emblematic lexical items, right? These very common lexical items associated with Albanians. And whether these kinds of perceptions, right, these kind of social evaluations are shared by Albanians and Greeks. So what we know about speech perception is really that listeners are really good about deducing various sorts of information about listeners, right, and about their speech, right? So they can tell things such as or determine pretty accurately their age. They can determine pretty accurately where they're from. And also speakers really are very happy to pass social judgments about listeners based on how they speak, right? So they assign social meaning to particular linguistic features, but also this social meaning is often mediated by other information that listeners can deduce about their speakers, right? Such as where they're from. And really, a really useful tool for all these kinds of information that we're able to deduce have been Misguise tests. So in Misguise test, I actually also used a Misguise test for my experiment. And I wanted to really check this variation here, right? So what happens when people, right? How do people evaluate somebody who says right? A sentence in Standard Modern Greek that contains the sound hu, or versus, right, somebody who produces, instead of hu, produces k in its position, or a ch sound. Right, so I wanted to figure out, especially, right, in terms of this variation, whether one of them is considered more Albanian, right, and if there is any difference in how people will evaluate the speaker who produces these Albanian Greek variants compared to somebody who produces the Standard Modern Greek variants. Sorry, the Standard Modern Greek variant. So in my experiment, I tested these sounds in a set of emblematic and non-emblematic lexical items. So I tested them in words such as maheri, right? Giving my listeners sentences containing the word maheri, right? Produced either as maheri or as makeri or as macheri. So I also tested and I'm calling these sets of words emblematic in that they were associated, right, in my meme study pretty frequently with Albanians. I also tested these sounds in a set of words that I call non-emblematic, and essentially words that really still have the same sounds, right, but do not emerge as in the memes as really being associated with Albanians. So my participants in my experiment heard, hopefully this audio will play actually. No, it's not gonna do, it's okay. So my participants in my study heard things such as "Πάρε καλύτερα το μαχαίρι του ψωμιού," and some other participants heard "Πάρε καλύτερα το μακέρι του ψωμιού." So I was checking then to see, right, what kind of social evaluations, and if there's going to be any differences in the social evaluations of these speakers who hear this one difference, right, between these two sentences. My participants, I should say I had a total of 210 participants in this experiment, sort of balanced for ethnicity. And I recruited them really from social media, mailing list, and friends of friends. After hearing each of these sentences, my participants heard, after hearing each sentence, each participant rated the talker they had just heard in various Likert scales, and particularly their agreement or disagreement with the following statements. So they rated the talker in terms of their agreement if the talker sounds friendly, likable, polite, or sensible, or an aggressive person. If it's a person who uses curses, or who could be a criminal, or who's from a rural area, or a person from Albania. The first four features really came from a pilot experiment that I actually conducted prior to my main experiment, and then the four next ones emerged as the most common constructions of Albanianness in the memes. And then I also added the question of how Albanian is the person perceived to check for any correlations between Albanianness and any of these other characteristics. I am, for the economy of time, or for the sake of time, I am actually going to talk only about these four characteristics: likable, aggressive, rural, and Albanian. But I'm happy to talk about this more if you want later or during the Q&A. I have a slide for my data analysis and my statistical analysis, but I'm going to skip it, and I'm also happy to talk about this in the Q&A. So the results. So very broadly, there was a significant effect of the variant that participants heard, right? So whether they heard something like a h or a k or a ch, right, really mattered. So when participants heard the Albanian Greek variants, they were perceived as more Albanian, right? Of course, which is expected. So when they heard something like k or ch instead of h, they were also perceived, though, as more rural, as more aggressive, and less likable. So we do see then some stigmatization of Albanian Greek arising, possibly could explained to some standard language ideologies being at play there, where non-standard language is just generally going to be evaluated as less favorable, right? Less favorably. In terms of likability, right, and how likable the speakers sounded, there was a significant effect in terms of the interaction between the variant that listeners heard and the listener ethnicity. So, for example, particularly for Albanian listeners, they rated the Greek variant h, or the speakers who produced the Greek variant h, as actually more likable, even though this difference is small, is actually statistically significant. They rated h as more likable than the Albanian Greek variant k. So we really see this Albanians penalizing, right, their compatriots for allowing their Albanians to show right through their accentedness, and for really allowing any sort of stigmatization to arise, right, to come to the forefront. And I call this what they're doing here really covert internalized racism, right, or racist ideologies, and I call it covert because Albanian listeners are penalizing other Albanians, right, or accented Albanians, in terms of these solidarity traits, right, likability, but not in other more overtly negative traits. So this is actually what's happening with the Greek listeners. So as you'll see here again, even though the ratings are at the lower end of the scale, there is a statistical significance in terms of aggressiveness perceptions, right? How aggressive the listener sounded, right? And Greeks were more likely to perceive the talker as aggressive rather than Albanian talkers. So we do see some kind of political correctness to sort of attempt to fall through, and some stigma at least to arise towards Albanian Greek. And I would like also to show some results in terms of implementicity. There was also a general significant effect of word implementicity. So the emblematic words were associated with Albanianness, ruralness, aggressiveness, and less likability. So, for example, here, the emblematic lexical items are perceived, again, these differences are small, but they're actually statistically significant. Emblematic lexical items are perceived as less likable, right, than, or speakers who produce emblematic lexical items are perceived as less likable than those who produce non-emblematic lexical items. And at the same time, speakers who produce emblematic lexical items are perceived as more aggressive than those who produce non-emblematic lexical items. So the emblematic lexical items seem to be pointing to the same kind of associations, right, that the Albanian Greek phonological features seem to produce, and both of these to make up what we call in linguistic an indexical field of Albanian Greek. So it's sort of associations, right, with particular linguistic features. So what we see in this study is that really, again, we have some kind of overt and covert racist ideologies arising by Greeks and Albanians respectively. We do see some standard language ideologies at play, right, and stigmatization of Albanian Greek features, both phonological and lexical. Talkers are perceived as more Albanian, which is of course expected, but also more rural. They're associated with aggressiveness and dissociated from likability. And all these merge into a single indexical field for Albanian Greek that have actually schematized in the following way. And I've actually included all my rating scales in this one, besides the one that I just talked about. So Albanians are associated with Albanianness, ruralness, criminality, this is crossed out, being foul-mouthed, and dissociated from friendliness, sensibility, likability, politeness. So I would actually like to present some of my current work, which is still incomplete, but I'm discovering some interesting partners, and I was really excited to share here today. So this work has to do with really the coping strategies, right, of Albanians that Albanians are employing in order to deal with all this discourse we just saw. Right, and particularly I'm focusing on Albanian personal names and the ethnic labels Albanians choose to designate themselves. Albanian migrants, again, right, to choose to designate themselves. So this is based off of 27 interviews that I've currently conducted with first generation and second generation Albanian migrants. And as I said, I explored Albanian names, first and family name changes, and also the word Albanosh. And I'm going to explain shortly why the word Albanosh. It's pretty sort of one of the things actually that the Albanians have been doing as a coping strategy with dealing with all these discourses, really adapting slightly their name or Hellenizing their names, first or family names, to be more Greek passing or more Greek-like, let's say. Another one is really changing their name altogether. This is often accompanied with baptism into Greek Orthodoxy, but not always. And to give you some context, right, Albanians are coming from an atheist state, right, from 1967 until the end of communism in the 1990s, right. They're really coming from an officially atheist state. Well, sort of all religion is prohibited, right. And then after that, we have, or formerly, right, we have a majority of Muslim families, let's say, in the country that either remain secular after the end of communism or continued or restarted, let's say, resumed practicing. And then a smaller percentage of Orthodox and Catholic families that mostly resumed practicing after the end of communism. So renames have been attested previously in the literature. So for Drica, parents sought to baptize their kids and give them Greek Christian names in order to help them integrate. Renamings are also seen as proof, right, to showing that, look, we are not a threat to the Greek society, and also, right, creating god-parenting relations in order to create some kind of bonds with the locals. So this is what my findings look like so far. So first name changes are really emerge as frequently common in my study as well. One interesting thing is that most of them seem to be externally imposed, right? Somebody else suggests them or sort of imposes them on Albanian migrants, especially, right, on the first generation. And when I say somebody else, it's typically actually the neighbors or the the Greek neighbors or the Greek employees. So, for example, kuitim, right, which is actually in Albanian means remembrance or memory, became my lexis by his Greek employers. And one reason for these sort of changes is often cited, right, by Greeks that there's difficulty, right, in pronouncing these Albanian names. So in tackling sort of this difficulty, I have to admit, yes, some of these are difficult, right? So we have the name Uli, right, which is actually means the sun, which is actually, yeah, it's a difficult name because Albanian doesn't, Greek doesn't have U or L, right? Or at least Standard Modern Greek doesn't have L, right? So it's hard for a Standard Modern Greek speaker to produce this word, right? So instead of, but whatever happened with this word is actually, or with the name Uli, is that it didn't just get adapted to whatever is the closest, whatever are the closest Greek sounds, which would be Ili, but actually it became fully Greek, right? Ilias. And sort of in looking at if these names are actually difficult, right? Artur mentioned also the same difficulty, right, expressed by his former employees, right, who named him Andreas. But really, if we look at Greek, Artur should not be difficult to produce because Greek has the word arteria, which has basically the same sequence of sounds, right? Save for the vowel U, which is E in Greek. So as I was saying, oftentimes, right, it's the employers that are imposing these names. I found this very interesting example of Ndoci, actually in our dialect, in our Northern Albanian dialect, is called Noc, who basically every time he got a new boss, got a new name. So at one point he was called Nikos, right? One employer called him Nikos, another called him Notis, another called him Socrates, and another called him Lukas. So these, some of my consultants mentioned, right, that these come with social benefits, right? Uli, for example, and Miri, who work together often, mentioned that really helps them build rapport. So actually, Uli is Elias, right, and Miri is Elias for his clients, whereas Miri, who works with him, oftentimes remained Miri. And what they both told me in separate actually interviews and without having talked with each other, they both mentioned that Elias seems to have better relations with the clients more than Miri does, right? Which and the clients actually preferring to talk to Elias for all sorts of business because he is Elias, because he has a Greek name that is so familiar to them. Even though, right, both are proficient in Greek, right, and both have been living in Greece for a long, long time. The benefits sort of are also psychological in nature rather than just sort of more practical in terms of their job. So I have an excerpt here from one of my consultants whose name is Pamela, but also took on Zoe as a child. So she says that for me, this was very important. I think that if I didn't have Zoe, I wouldn't have survived emotionally. First, I think I would have been forced to face something that I wasn't ready to face back then. Secondly, if I hadn't been in that position to have that refuge, perhaps a violent come out, as I call revealing my identity without it being my intention, in Greece, where anything Albanian is reprehensible, negative, and shameful, I think would have been very hard for me if it wouldn't have allowed, and it wouldn't have allowed me to realize what had happened to me. Right, so here we have this this Zoe, right? So the Greek name as really helping in this coming out process, right? And being this coming out process of revealing her ethnic origin as being done in her own terms, right? Rather than having to be done in a violent way when people, right, heard Pamela and had to question her ethnicity. Besides first names, we also have changed in family names. So a couple of my informants mentioned that they've been told that really having a Christian name could help them secure residency permits, right, at a time where residency permits were difficult to acquire. So, for example, the last name Hoja was turned into Marku because a Greek public worker, right, informed my advisor that the Christian-sounding name is gonna really secure him the permit. In other cases, family name Hellenizations happen, sort of adding little affixes such as is or as at the ends of words, which make them be Greek passing. So one of my consultants, whose last name is Pascali, or family name is Pascali, was asked by the police officer when she went to issue her Greek state ID why she didn't change it to Pascali with a ita rather than keep it with a iota. She did, right, because the ita would make her look more Greek, whereas iota are sort of like reveals, right, that she is not Greek. So discussing this with her, actually, what she mentioned to me is that how could I, right? Μέσα στο επίθετό μου είναι το βίωμά μου, right? My last name carries my lived experience. So in continuing this conversation, right, about her last name, she actually mentioned that Pascali, oftentimes when is being asked about her last name, people hear it as Paschali, right, which is actually more Greek passing. So she mentions that generally when they hear my name, actually my last name, they can't tell if it's Albanian because many hear Paschali, so not Pascali. Besides the cases where my last name has to be properly written and the time that I feel safe to correct it. When I don't feel safe, I don't do it. Or when I don't think we have enough time for me to explain how it's written, what it is, I don't go into the trouble. I let them write it as Paschali. However, when I write it, many times, whenever I corrected it and there's something impeding my slide and I couldn't see it. Many times I've corrected it and I've said that it's Pascali, and I didn't really have much fun, right, with the follow-up questions. So here we have, right, again, the mishearing or the mishearing of the name as being Greek passing, really helping her, right, creating a safe environment for her, right, and being really, when only feeling comfortable, revealing, right, or correcting people's pronunciations of her name as Pascali, which is totally not Greek passing. And I followed that with what are the questions that follow after, right? She corrects people, and she responded with, what's the last name? Is it Albanian? I generally prefer that whenever I tell them that it's Albanian, that they stop commenting on things. Like this thing follows where some Greeks feel guilty and start saying that they have friends that are Albanian, or, oh, Albanian is a pretty country, things like that. And I'm like, okay, fine. I just mentioned it, move on. I just mentioned my origin, move on. We don't have to talk about it. So again, here we have this idea, right, of there's just too many follow-up questions once it's revealed, right? Once the Albanian identity is revealed, or once the non-Greek name is revealed. So really, Paschali, right, being misheard as this Greek last name, helps her avoid these questions, but also helps her, right, really avoid this what I call othering, right? Really stressing and highlighting that you're not from here, right? Where are you from? So I'm going to close with some last few data here, and this has to do with the ethnic labels Albanians choose for themselves, right, in talking about their origin in Greek. So the word, for those of you not familiar with the context, the word Albanos, Albanian, in Greek is really used as an ethno-racial slur. And what I was looking to find is really what are the strategies that people use to navigate this slur when at the same time the word also means Albanian man in Greek. So one of the strategies was really to say, Έχω καταγωγή από Αλβανία, I have Albanian origin, which avoids Albanos, right, the slur, but also creates some kind of incomplete identification with Albanianness, right? It's not dissociating from Albanianness, but it's not completely identifying with it altogether. And I found this actually being used by both first and second generation Albanian migrants. Another strategy that is actually used by second generation Albanian migrants is the following, saying, Γεννήθηκα στην Αλβανία, αλλά μεγάλωσα στην Ελλάδα. I was born in Albania, but I grew up in Greece. So here we have this, right? Genethikas in Albania, was born in Albania, moderate attachment to Albanianness. At the same time, we have, but I grew up in Greece, also some kind of moderate claim to Greekness, right? So we have this dual identity that is really, really cautiously constructed, right? Because you cannot really make any claim for any two of these identities, right? Or complete claim for any of these identities, right? Your Greekness is constantly, right? Or your lack of Greekness is constantly reminded with, where are you from, right? What is your name? What is this name? Where is it from? But at the same time, right, they don't feel that they cannot attach themselves with Albanianness, right, a country they haven't grown up in. And a third strategy I'd like to discuss is this is typical, not typical, but it came up often from the first generation migrants, and is either saying I'm 100% Albanian or I'm ime puro Albanos, right? I'm pure Albanian. And I really see this as sort of this really trying hard to say that I am Albanian, right? And please don't confuse me with these other Albanians who claim to be Vorepirotes, right? So who have sort of denied their Albanianness and have claimed, right, some kind of Greek origin, right, from the so-called Vorepiros. So I'm going to read some final conclusions now. So really what we see, what we've seen so far is that really, despite these courses about the successful integration of Albanians in Greece, the xenophobic attitudes are present. They're not blatant, right? But they are sort of in this realm of microaggression, but they do become evident under the right analytic and experimental setup. Albanians do have developed some kind of these coping strategies, such as really this violent assimilation and erosion of Albanianness through the name changes, first and family names, but also avoidance of ethnic labeling, right? That carries insult and carries slur, and also I see it sort of forceful kind of pride, right? Trying to force some kind of pride towards their ethnic origin, because they've been not judged, but sort of accused of being ashamed of their Albanian origin for years. Of course, all these work, right, to belittle Albanianness, and by way of belittling Albanianness, elevating Greekness. But this does have real consequences, right, for Albanian migrants, right, for these vulnerable groups. And it became really clear, really, in the trauma that emerged again and again in the second generations narratives about their experience in Greece in a roundtable Linda Jeza and I did in the late 2021. So these are some of my references and my thanks. Thank you. Faleminderit. Ευχαριστώ. I see I went a bit over time, actually.
Thank you, Regina. That was such a fascinating presentation, and I'm sure there'll be some questions from the audience. I just might kickstart the questioning. Migration started in 1990, so that's sort of 33 years. It's almost sort of two generations. What I've heard anecdotally is, Albanians become sort of quite settled in Greece, and their children even more so. Is that one of the problem, let's say, Albanian parents in Greece have, is that their children don't speak Albanian or not well enough or so forth. Having then grown up in Greece, do they then sort of struggle in learning Albanian or replicating the sounds, because Albanian's got sort of, a larger, more letters in the alphabet and so forth? Do you have the reverse problem there, having grown up in Greece, Greek becoming the first language, although Albanian might be spoken at home? Do the children have difficulties in sort of learning Albanian?
Yeah. So really, the difficulty has to do with exposure, right? So how much exposure they're getting of the language, and that's one of the problems, right? It's not just that maybe they cannot, but really they are not getting enough exposure in Albanian, because our brains are actually amazing. Children's brains are amazing, and like the younger they are, the more amazing they are, and they can learn so many languages at the same time, right? And their brains just figure it out and put them in really neat places in their brains. And are able to deal with as many languages as they're exposed to, as long as they have significant input, right? So one of the things that I've discussed, at least with a lot of other sort of Albanian second generation Albanian migrants, is that we don't really get that exposure, right? So because of all this discourse that is happening, right, parents are discouraged, right, from actually speaking Albanian with their children, right? It can be, oftentimes they are discouraged by teachers themselves, right? So teachers have this I don't know, they carry these language myths that, but this additional language you speak at home, right, is really hindering your child's learning of acquisition of Greek, right? And of course, parents want their children to succeed, right, in school, right, where the Greek is the medium of education. And they're like, okay, we got to do something about it, right? We got to start speaking to our children in Greek, even at home, right, so that we can help sort of with their schooling and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. But at the same time, right, looking at all these discourse that's happening around them, right, there is really no value, right? There's no absolutely whatsoever value or positive value associated with Albanian language itself, right? Or with Albanians in general. So really, there's no motivation for parents to to speak to their children or even try to teach them the language, right? There is sort of, I'm making a generalization here, right, in terms of the motivations. But I should say that actually the least motivation is in actually teaching in a more formal classroom context. Many parents will speak with their children Albanian, and actually I've heard also children saying that they don't speak Albanian, but actually do speak Albanian, right? They will claim in the classroom, right, into their teachers or to the classmates, I don't speak Albanian, or sort of understand Albanian. And I've actually been that kid, that they don't speak Albanian, but really, really do speak it, right? And there was somebody telling me recently that that was the case for another Albanian was telling me that was the case actually for her in a classroom that she visited, until the children felt comfortable enough with the teacher to say to her that actually I speak Albanian, right? So sort of whispering. But yeah, really motivations, right? And also from the children, because children are not blind, right? They're understanding, right? They're receiving, again, all these discourses. And there's also some really motivation, again, for the children also to learn the language, to acquire the language, right? English is seen as prestigious to acquire, right? French, German, and so on and so forth, but not Albanian. There's also missing the material sort of aspect of it, right? Or the utilitarian sort of aspect of it, right? English comes with jobs, I don't know, good job prospects and so on and so forth. Albanian, what does it come? Good family relations?
True, but from a geographical proximity perspective, there's more opportunity to visit, let's say, the motherland sort of every year and so forth. But
Yeah.
I more asked that question because, I mean, here in the Greek community, we're interested about any type of language learning in diaspora. I think there's sort of similar challenges, and okay, got a few questions. Let's see. First one's from Costas. Was the study double-blind, or were some of the participants aware of your background? I'm just asking if there could have been some masking if they deduced the purpose of your study.
I imagine this question refers to the experiment, right?
Yes, yeah.
So the majority of them were not aware of my origin, especially where I used sort of a mailing list and so on and so forth. But I mean, I am required by the university to put in my contact information, right? My name as a researcher in the study, right? So that may be my contact information in the study. So it's obvious that my name is non-Greek, right? So I don't know if they can tell that my name is Albanian necessarily, but they can definitely tell that my name is non-Greek. So there is definitely some kind of effect there, but I cannot tell for sure. But yeah, it's unavoidable that it will be seen.
Okay. Next question for Steve Bakalis, and I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it, being the presenter. The word Xathafos was prominent in your presentation. Gazman Kaplani, a writer with whom you share a similar academic background, said that Greeks and Albanians don't get along as cousins, and felt he was pushed away from Greece. Is there a phenomenon of a brain drain also with Greek Albanians?
Yeah, it's actually, I think, Greek Albanians are just following the same trend of like young migration, right, from Greece, right? So there's just since actually the financial crisis of 2008, right, 2009, there's been a huge brain drain, or brain leak, let's say, I don't know how to call it, from Greece, right, of the younger population from Greece into mainly European Union countries, right, the UK. And as actually Albanians have followed along, right, especially after 2015, 2016, where a lot of young Albanian Greeks were able to secure Greek citizenships. Were able to eventually, right, of course, move onwards, migrate to secondary migratory destinations, right? Germany, Sweden, the UK, right up until recently, was a very popular migratory destination, right? Same as basically the same routes, or most of the same routes as other Greeks have been following in their migration. And really, actually, this gives me a nice sort of promo chance to say that I actually have a project with Petros Karatsarias at the University of Westminster, looking at this onward migration of Albanian Greeks into the UK, right? So, and looking at their linguistic repertoires and how they use them to construct relationships, right, social and professional, in the UK, right, in the new migratory destination as migrants for a second time.
If I can just add to that question, because I had to do some reading preparing for this talk, Rexhina. I think I came across a statistic. The 2010 census said there's something like over 500,000 Albanians in Greece, and that last year fell to under 300,000. And it's part of the overall brain drain that's happened during the crisis as well. So,
Yeah.
Have skills, will travel, basically. And okay. Just ask another question. Another group in Greece that doesn't speak Greek perfectly, in inverted commas, is the Roma community and so forth. And yes, they don't have an official language, a written language, and so forth. Have there been any comparative studies if some of their sounds might be similar to what we're getting here in the Albanian phenomenon?
That's a very good question. I'm really not much aware of sort of the Greek associated, or I'm not aware of studies, I guess, with the Greek associated with the Roma in Greece. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. I can definitely see, right, that some of the features that I discussed could overlap, right? So some of these features can be considered, let's say, standard L2 features, right, for somebody learning Greek as a second language. But again, it really depends on where we're starting from, right? And a lot of it has to do also with their first language, right, that as a starting point, let's say, and what kind of imposition or what kind of influence we see from these first languages. So I could say definitely, right, things such as I don't know actually a lot about Romani, but maybe if Romani doesn't have this h sound, right, I could see it very easily being substituted with k. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know much about the matter. But it's definitely, right, another stigmatized group, right? In terms, right, of in terms of their language, right, and also their ethnic identification.
And Regina, at this point in time, what's the state of affairs with those wanting to learn Albanian in Greece? Are they equivalent for the studia for adults or something like that? What's the state of affairs? Or
Yeah. As far as I know, there is no for the studia. There is some. I think there is some kind of initiative slowly for like one of these big sort of companies, right, that owns Frontisteria to maybe start Albanian classes. But really, a lot of the schooling, let's say in Albania, or the official language learning happens by volunteer teachers, right? So teachers who were sort of educated and got their qualifications in Albania, In Greece, basically, pretty much everybody is doing some kind of other profession, right? Not working as teachers, and really teaching on a voluntary basis, and actually a lot of having to go through a lot of bureaucratic difficulties each year, actually, because each year they will have to go through the δευτεροβάθμια εκπαίδευση, I don't know how that's called, but like some kind of office of education in their local area to ask for permission for Albanian to be taught, and also to ask for a space where Albanian can be taught. Right. So typically these are some kind of classroom, maybe in a school, right, on Sundays. And it's actually very strictly overseen. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, Petros and I have a project. Petros Karatsias and Minister have a project on Albanian onward migrants. And actually, in Greece, we were in Athens this past May, talking with these volunteer teachers, and really the bureaucratic hurdle doesn't even stop even in the textbooks, where the textbooks are sent from Albania, like the language learning textbooks, right? I'm not talking about geography or history textbooks that are not even taught, right? These topics are sort of forbidden to be taught whatsoever. But language learning textbooks are sent through a diplomatic cargo because they have to make sure, right, whatever, or I don't know, whatever content is in them has to be sanctioned, let's say, right? Has to be checked. So really, it's really hard, right?
Even though they might be just private schools, or
I'm sorry.
Even though they might be just private schools.
Yeah, I mean, these are not organized by the Greek government, right? These are like all private initiatives, right? Individuals' initiatives and teachers' initiatives and parents' initiatives.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't think. I think most of our listeners are still trying to absorb your topic, and yeah. Look, thank you for that presentation. It really did expose a lot of things that many of us weren't aware of. Best of luck with your thesis. Hope it'll get converted to an academic monograph down the track, and be good to have you back in this series sometime.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Okay, and hope to see you all at next week's seminar as well. Good night, everyone.
Good night.